Oh, hi, doggo. What did you bring me? Really? Uranium waste? Yeah, that's gonna kill me. Hey, HTDA, and welcome back to Satisfactory. This is my bite-sized run, which is aimed at those of you who want to progress through this game without every build taking weeks to complete, but still have an awesome-looking factory. And in order to have an awesome-looking factory, we are going to have to replace our biofuel production, or power production, I should say, with something that is completely automated. And we definitely want to do so in a way that doesn't take a huge amount of time, so let's get to it. And as a first important next step, we are going to have to build the space elevator. Now, I recommend just placing it pretty much anywhere, but kind of off to the side. It's a huge building, as you can see, and we simply want to have it somewhere where we can easily reach it, but it doesn't get in the way. Now, you could build it on foundations if you want. It does look a little bit better if you do, but we're probably going to have to move these several times before we're done, because this is definitely not the final place where we want to place this. Now, I have to admit, this building is my favorite building to actually build, because just look at how awesome this is. I mean, the actual elevator comes down from space, and there's so much gravitas in this whole thing clicking together, placing itself. And yeah, I would recommend just building it 5 times in a row just to see how awesome this is. I mean, this is so much detail right here. Just all of this clicking together and stuff like that. So yeah, this is just the best building in the game, if you ask me. However, that is not what we're here to do. So if you followed my playthrough so far, you should have enough resources by now to just unlock the first level of the space elevator. Now, you might actually have a little bit more. You don't actually need that. Just make sure you seal it in and then send it all the way up. It will shoot off into the sky. Once again, best building ever. Oh, there it goes. And we will now have more milestones unlocked at our hub. Now, in order to follow along for this episode, you're going to need to unlock 3 things. That is the Logistics Mark II, if you haven't unlocked that just yet. That will give us access to belts that will be able to transport 120 items per minute. We are also going to need, of course, coal power unlocked, otherwise we won't actually have access to the coal generator. We're also going to need the water extractor. And then last but not least, we are going to use tractors to do a lot of the transporting. Now, this is something that I do different, I think, from a lot of other YouTubers that seem to hate any vehicle in the game that's not a train. And I actually think they're wrong about that. And I'm hopefully going to show you the power of tractors, maybe not in this episode necessarily, but it is definitely going to be a huge time saver, because tractors will be able to transport things all over the place without us having to build massive belt systems. That said, feel free to leave the actual unlocking of the tractors until we actually need them, because you're probably going to need a lot of rotors in order to unlock this, and also you're going to need rotors to unlock coal power as well as to build coal generators. So just make sure you have your actual build done before you start handcrafting a lot of rotors and things like that in order to unlock these last few things, because likely by the time we're done with this build, you're going to have those rotors waiting for you in our storage units rather than you having to handcraft yourself. So again, that will just save you a little bit of time. Now, as a side note, if you want to limit the amount of handcrafting that you are doing, you might want to consider just temporarily interrupting some of the construction that we have going on in our main facility. So for example, we are making rotors over here that are being split into a storage unit, but also half of them are going into smart plating. We are going to need 500 smart plating later on, but right now it's not a main priority because we just want to get our fuel up and running. So you might as well just cut this belt in half just for a moment, so that all the rotors are actually going to go in this production facility, so we can grab those off the belt. Similarly, over here, and this might actually be more important even, is the production of reinforced iron plates. They are usually being split 3 ways, so we have one going up here with a lift on this belt all the way on the other side to make modular frames, but we're going to need a lot of modular frames at this point, and you probably already have maybe 50 or so of them. And similarly, they are also feeding into the smart plating. So once again, you might as well just interrupt it like I've done over here. And that will just help you limit the amount of reinforced iron plates that you have to craft by hand. Because you're probably going to need to craft a couple of them. You are going to need enough for 3 water extractors and 8 coal generators. And then probably something on top of that for belts and stuff like that. So you don't need that all at once. You can of course do it in batches, but I like to come prepared. So make sure you have enough for at least these 11 buildings and then some to spare on top of that for belts mostly. So that's reinforced iron plates because we are going to need Mark II belts. Now, I promise you later on in this series, you're not going to do as much handcrafting as right now, but especially early in the game, it's just a huge time saver actually to handcraft a couple of things rather than make a huge building that's going to overproduce those items in the long run. At least you're not going to need as much of them later on. And yeah, that will also be a huge drain on your power, while this small facility is actually going to be able to run for a very long time on the biofuel that we already have set up. So, just my 2 cents. Of course, if you want to upgrade your buildings before you progress beyond this point, by all means go ahead and do so. If that's fun to you, then that is definitely the way you should be going in your playthrough. Now, you're going to want to find this little oasis in the middle of nowhere, which is actually quite close to a lot of gas clouds, but the gas clouds are far enough away in order not to bother us. And this lake is a little bit to the northeast of where we started. Now, there's actually another lake in the northwest, I suppose. That might initially seem a little bit more convenient, but the reason I'm using this one is because it's kind of out of the way and there's a lot more flat ground here that we can use later on for some of our larger builds. Now, we're also going to need coal, which we can now scan for. And when we do, you'll find that there is one coal node over here. And there's a second coal node very close to where we actually started. Now, once again, I'm actually going to use this for something else. We're going to need a lot of coal for steel as well. And it's a lot more easier to reach this one and make sure it's actually being able to interact with iron, which we need both of them in order to make steel. So I'm just going to use the most inconvenient coal node in order to make power. Now, there's actually a lot of coal a lot further to the north as well, where in my previous playthrough I actually built my coal facility over there. It's a very valid place to also build a very large coal power facility, but I actually don't think you need that much coal power, and again, you might want to use all that coal for something else. So I'm just gonna build a smaller facility over here, and let's talk about how we're going to do that. So when we face with our back towards the oasis, you can actually see this kind of valley over here, which is all shrouded in mist. And the coal node that we're looking for is actually on top of this little hill over here. So again, it's not that far away. Now, we are going to build the actual coal facility over here because it's a lot easier to bring coal to the water than vice versa. And in order to do that, we are going to use 4-meter foundations. We're going to make sure we press Control in order to align it to the world grid. And let's build this up just a few nodes. And then I think it should be nicely aligned with this. So we're going to want to build inside, I think about 5 foundations wide, or deep I should say. And then we're going to want to build, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, at least 8 wide. Now, as you can see, this is kind of hovering in the air now. It's probably going to need to be a little wider than this. Side note, you will also find a lot of hostile creatures here. Those little running beasts that will smash themselves into you. There shouldn't be too much of a problem to handle, but a nice little trick is actually to kind of jump on top of a foundation. They seem to very much struggle with getting on top of any platform, basically, so that will keep you safe for a long time. Now, we're going to make sure we build this out in a nice little square, and then we're going to take it from there. So once you've built yourself a square platform of about 5 foundations wide, or deep I should say, and then about 10 wide, you should be able to fit in a total of 8 coal generators on top of that. Now we want to make sure that it's facing the water and that we also get it as far as we can get it to the edge of this actual platform. So if we place it like this, I think it should be... no, it's actually sticking out just a little bit. Why is it not on my bar? There we go. Okay, so let's see if we can get it a little bit better in position. There we go. I think this should be fine. Yep, nice on the edge. And I think it's also nicely on this side, on the edge. Yep, there we go. And then you can easily place the other 7 ones just by keeping Control pressed and then placing these. They will automatically try to align with the other generators already in place. If I counted correctly, this should be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yes. And the nice thing about working a little bit towards these gas clouds over there is it will actually leave this kind of natural ramp in here open. Not entirely sure what we're going to do with that, but at least we have easy access to that in case we need it. Now, we can actually, I think we can actually take out one more line of foundations, and then we have them nicely fitting in the platform that we've built. Now, next step, we are going to need some water and we're going to need some belts. So let's start working on that and then walk you through how I set that up. Okay, so first up are the belts, and there's actually a couple of ways to build this. There's definitely the fast way, which includes setting up lifts to the building like this. Make sure the input is facing away from the building. And like you can see, connecting all of this up is really easy. And then the second thing you can do is set up a splitter. And you can actually directly connect that to the lift. And remember, the lift only needs to be a Mark 1, so don't spend your precious reinforced plates on that. And connect them up like so. Make sure the inputs are all facing to the side, and preferably all to the same side. And then you are going to need a Mark 2 belt. And just connect all of these up. Of course, make sure you're connecting them up on the correct side. There we go. And so on for all 8 of them. Now, this is a really fast way of setting up the belts for a coal facility like this. There's one downside to that, and that might not bother you, but the coal is actually going to go down from the splitter through the bottom of this splitter into the building. So if you imagine there being a hatch over here, that might not bother you, but it will actually be clipping through the actual splitter if you build it like this. So alternatively, I'm going to show you another way of building this. So slightly more work, but definitely a lot more neat, is putting the splitters slightly away from the actual coal facility. So if you kind of put them next to it first, and then you go 1, 2 slots to the right, and then you stack up 3 of them, and they will alternate, but that's okay. And similarly over here, let's just make sure it's aligned. And then 1, 2, 3, and then we go to this one and make sure it's aligned. Remember, pressing Control will bring up these lines so you can ensure it's aligned without having to micromanage every single one of them. Then make sure you connect the top one, and just the top one, you don't actually need the other ones. And if you place down the first one correct, then the other ones should be all aiming in the same direction. They will alternate once again the directions of these things, but that's not a problem. And then once again we can use the Mark 1 lifts, connect them up here and down there. And that will exactly fit into, well, slightly clipping. Maybe, I don't know, I can't even see. So it's close enough. And that will connect the lift to the actual coal facility without any clipping happening. Now, of course, then you will still be stuck with these splitters that we don't actually need, so you can remove them. If it bothers you having them fly around in the air, what you can actually do is put down 2 of these stacker poles. Now, if you stack up 2 of them, that's exactly enough to actually connect them up to the belt if you build them like this. And then you can remove all the other splitters. And then you end up with a pretty decent looking supported facility. Now, of course, we are actually going to bring in the coal from this side, so this kind of looks empty now, but there's going to be something over here. Let's just place it just so I can get a feel for what it will look like. Why is this not connecting? Well, anyway, you get the point. This looks a little bit more neat, but I actually like, especially for these initial builds, I like the other style. So that's what I'm going with here. Now, if you're anything like me, you probably struggled a lot with building pipes initially, and actually, if you are smart about it, it's not that hard. So I recommend starting out with a pipeline support in a place that's somewhere away from the lift, so you don't get into any issues with those. And just build it right on the edge, and then let's just place one halfway. So that's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's going to be right here. And remember, make use of those lines so you can know it's aligned without having to fiddle around with that too much. And then you can easily build the pipe just from one to the other. There we go. And then it's actually easier if you get on top of the pipe. So we're going to need a foundation for that until we get ourselves a little power boost. And then if you hold control, once again, the junction will automatically align itself to the inputs that are on the same height as the pipe. There we go. So this is very easy to build this. I'm now stuck on something, not sure what. There we go. And there we go. That's all 8 of them. And then all we need to do is, of course, make sure we hook up the pipes to the actual junctions. So I think this looks pretty good, and of course all of this construction is not going to be of any use if we don't actually get water and coal in here. So speaking of water, we have our pool over here, and I'm gonna set up a very simple water pumping facility, which looks like this. And like I said, it's pretty simple. We have nicely organized pipes. Well, I thought they were nicely organized, but I was wrong about that. Let me quickly fix that, because I do think having 90-degree angles on your pipes makes them look a lot better than if you don't. Just makes it look a lot more organized like this. So we have a total of 3 water pumps. That's exactly enough to supply these 8 coal facilities with enough water to completely function. You don't want to power them up straight away. These things actually cost a lot of power, and the water currently is not going anywhere, so there's not really any reason to power them up just yet. But all in all, it's pretty straightforward. Now, I do think that actually making the connectors first and making sure the base pipe is there and then setting up these junctions is definitely the easiest way to build something like this. Then it's also a matter of just connecting the pumps to the actual connectors like this. Now you have 3 different modes to build pipes. I highly prefer the horizontal to vertical mode. I think that just makes, for almost every situation, makes the pipes look the most neat. But of course that's completely up to your taste, so feel free to build them in whatever way you think is actually the most structured, most pretty looking, most badass looking, most spaghetti looking, whatever you prefer. However, speaking of spaghetti, we are also going to need some coal here in order for this to actually do anything. So let's go off to that little hill in the distance and get ourselves some coal. Now, before you hop off to the coal node, make sure that you have the vehicular transport unlocked. That will give you access to tractors and truck stations. Not entirely sure why this is called truck stations when we're actually unlocking the trucks later on, but that's just a little peeve I have. One thing, you might actually need to handcraft some rotors depending on how fast you were with the other build, and of course, hopefully you did keep your facility running all the time, because having an unpowered facility is always a bad idea in a game that's all about production. In total, you're going to need about 145 rotors, about 100 to, well, exactly 100 to unlock this, and then 45 to build 2 truck stations and a tractor. That's all you need, so you don't need to handcraft more than that, but do make sure you have that much on you when you go to the coal node, so you can just build everything at once. Now, I do promise that this is probably the episode in this entire series where we're going to be doing the most handcrafting in total. It's mostly because we are making a lot of investments up front. We don't really have the infrastructure set up yet to produce anything at a larger scale. We don't have the power in order to do that. That is something we will be fixing in this episode. So yeah, just stick with the handcrafting for now rather than trying to build up a huge facility to produce, for example, these rotors faster, and spending the same time you could be handcrafting them on actually building the facility and then still needing to wait for the production to actually take place. That just doesn't make sense. It feels efficient, but it's not. So definitely don't be afraid to handcraft early in the game. Now, in case you're wondering, CDA, how am I gonna get up there to the coal? Well, actually, it's pretty simple, and I'm hoping some of you already know this, but just build a ramp, put the mode to zoop, and make sure it's aimed in the right direction, and you can just drag it all the way up there. And assuming you get the distance about right, you should be able to just hop on there and then walk all the way up here. Now, we're going to have access to more elegant ways of getting up here, but for now it works and we're right here. And now we just have to take care of the locals. Once you get up here, all you need to do is build a simple platform with a miner, and that miner will be producing 120 coal per minute. So this is a pure node, producing twice as much as a normal node, and it's exactly enough that we can fit it on a single Mark II belt. So do make sure that your belts are Mark II belts and that your lift is a Mark II lift, otherwise you will be having a problem with supplying your coal machines. Now there's actually over here in the corner, I already picked it up, there is a blue slug as well, that while you're up here you might as well pick up, because you're going to need those later on. Now on the ground floor you're going to want to build a platform where you put a truck station, and you're going to want to make sure that that truck station is easily reachable by a vehicle that's going to be driving around. So make sure you put a ramp towards the truck station and put it somewhere where you have a bit of space around it, because those trucks do need some way to maneuver around, and they're not always the smartest, so just making sure you have a little bit of extra space in order for that to easily happen is very convenient, to make sure nothing breaks down and gets stuck. Now, in general, by the way, the trucks are now pretty good at unstocking themselves. If they keep banging their heads into something, at some point they will just phase out and get boosted straight through that. But generally speaking, just want to make sure everything runs smoothly without that being needed. Now, of course, your lift is going to feed into a splitter, and the reason that we have a splitter over here is because our coal is not just going to go into this truck station in order to be transported away from here, but it's also going to be the fuel on which our truck is going to be driving. So we need a second output from our splitter into the fuel station. Now this will only store up one single stack of fuel, so it's not going to be a huge drain on our coal supply. And I can hear some of you thinking, okay, 120 coal is exactly enough to feed 8 of those power facilities, those coal facilities, at maximum speed. So if we're using our coal for our trucks, we're going to have a problem. Yes and no. This is only going to be a problem if our coal facilities are actually running at 100% speed, but by the time they're running at 100% speed, we're going to want to build more power. So they should never be running at a full 100%. So that means we should be able to leech off a little bit of coal in order to keep our truck running. More about that in a moment. And of course, we're also going to need a truck station on the other side, which we have over here. And of course, we have an outgoing belt on the back. Just make sure you connect it to the correct ones. We have 2 outgoing slots and 2 ingoing slots. And we are going to be exporting that to the belts that we already put in place earlier. Now, we don't actually need to put in fuel in this particular truck station, because we are already fueling it on the other side. But if for whatever reason we feel we also need fuel over here, we can always just feed it in with a belt, kind of like this, from one side to the other. But like I said, I can't think of any reason why you would want to do that. I'm just giving it to you as an option in case you do have a purpose for that. Now, that means that all we have left to do is make sure our truck knows where to go and how to get there. And setting up a truck route is really simple, but I'll show you just in case you don't know. So make sure you fuel your truck with preferably coal, so it's already fueled up with whatever we're intending it to run on long term. Press Q to open the record menu, press start recording. You can actually disable the menu for a moment. Just drive around as you would want it to go. Make sure you start loading it. You don't actually need to stop and wait for that. We can fix that later on. And then we are going to drive to our destination, and it's going to be very straightforward, and I'll just show you because it's not a long round. Now keep in mind that trucks do tend to crush any little shrubs that they run into, so you don't have to drive around those if you don't want to. And there we go. Slow down a little bit. Let's unload. We are taking damage, but the truck is actually not, so you don't have to worry about that gas cloud damaging your truck or anything like that. And then we're just going to drive back There's only going to be one truck on this route, so we don't have to worry about collisions or anything like that. And then when we get back to the end of our route, all we need to do is connect it to our starting point. And there we go. It will say our route is finished. Just stop moving, open the, press save path, then give it a proper name. So call run. And you might need to be more specific when you have multiple of those, but yeah. Drive a little bit back in my case, and then all you need to do is open the record menu once again and enable the autopilot, and then just get out of your truck. And there we go. It should now be driving all by itself. It should be loading and unloading and basically doing whatever it is you told it to do. Okay, so I promised a little bit more information about how we can make our tractors as fuel efficient as we can get them. And in order to do that, what you need to do is first set the route and then figure out how often you actually need this truck to run this route. Because by default, it will just load and unload and keep driving all the time and just make sure it's basically non-stop active. But that's actually really inefficient because, as you can see, this one trip takes 9 coal, which means because a truck needs 55 megawatts of energy in order to drive around, and 1 coal gives it 300 megawatts, and then that means 1 coal is going to make sure it's going to be able to drive for about 5.5 seconds. So 9 times 5.5 means this route is going to take about 1 minute to drive. So in that 1 minute, our coal miner is going to produce about 1 stack, a little bit more than 1 stack of coal. So that means that if we just have this truck driving up and down the entire time, at some point it's just going to drive up and down with 1 stack of coal. Maybe a little bit more than that, but basically it's going to be driving around empty. That is completely useless. Now, we also know that there is a total of 48 stacks that fits into a truck station because it has 48 slots. That means that at a rate of 120 coal per minute, it would actually take 14 minutes for that truck station to completely full up. In that time, that means we could basically have the truck sitting still for 39 minutes, load up completely full, then drive for 1 minute, unload its complete contents into the other truck station, and then drive back, and that would take about 1 minute, and then sit still for another 39 minutes. And that means it's only going to do 1 trip per 40 minutes, and then sit still for the entire rest of the time. That cuts down the fuel consumption of the tractor to about 2.5% of what it would normally do. And it's already only taking 9 coal per trip, so that's 9 coal per 40 minutes. Now, I can hear you think, yeah, but that just means it's going to sit there for 40 minutes before it takes its first trip. Yeah, so that's definitely not what we want to do, but it does work very well to illustrate that if we reduce the amount of times this truck is going to be driving around, then we can make it a lot more fuel efficient. Now, making sure a truck waits somewhere is really easy. Just go to the node where you see this stopping sign and then press E and then adjust the waiting time to something like, for example, 5 minutes. So that should be 360 seconds. Then confirm that and set it. And that means this truck that will be driving over now should be standing still here for 5 minutes before continuing on and doing another route. Now, generally speaking, you do want to think a little bit about where you have your trucks standing still, because of course, if they are standing still somewhere where there's going to be other trucks driving as well, this is just going to cause traffic, and we're on an empty planet, so we should not get stuck in traffic anywhere. But it's a really easy way to cut down on your fuel consumption if that is something you're worried about. Now, in this specific situation, it doesn't really matter. We can just have the truck driving around all the time. It would only require a minimal amount of fuel, but generally speaking, it is a good idea to just make sure that your trucks are not driving around unnecessarily. And there we go, guys. We have our entire production up and running. We have a total steady production of 600 megawatts and a total capacity of 820, because of course we still have our biofuel in case we have any spikes in power demand. So that means that we will not have any issues making sure that we can produce whatever we want, because for now Our maximum consumption, and that is when everything is actually operating at full speed, is only 300 megawatts. So plenty of room to expand. We have a little truck driving around, and all of this took me about 2.5 hours to build, and most of that was actually making the rotors in order to unlock all those things that we needed. But I think about half of that time was actually just spent crafting some things in between, also running around collecting some leaves and stuff like that in order to make sure that our facility was still running. That is something we definitely don't have to do from this point on anymore, because we have automated automated power, I should say, and that means that we can really take our builds to the next stage. Now, this is a good example of a time saver, I think, making sure that we didn't have to run long belts and things like that. Hey, look, the 5 minutes passed and our truck now decides to start driving. It seems to have some issues with that corner, but all in all, it's doing its job. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed this one. Make sure you join in for the next few, where we're going to expand on this idea a little bit further, and I hope to catch you in those next ones.